issues, the strongest winds across parts of South Wales and southern England. Please check the Met Office website for details of all the warnings.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. A Tory MP caused uproar last week, saying her staff were being harassed by asylum seekers. We went to Hartlepool to find out whether what she said was true. We'll cover the latest protests in London tonight, which are pretty shocking, and go to Israel and find out what is happening in Gaza as we speak. And it was the big day in the COVID inquiry when those closest in the government to Boris Johnson, including Dominic Cummings, gave their testimony. They tell us today what they really thought about the Prime Minister. But is it really true? Was he really like a shopping trolley crashing around the corridors of Number 10? We'll debate all of that this evening, but first, let's get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Nigel, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest. Boris Johnson's former chief advisor has told the COVID inquiry. He warned of the NHS imploding like a zombie apocalypse film. Dominic Cummings says he called for daily crisis meetings, fearing the pandemic was coming much faster than expected. He also said the government had no plan to help vulnerable people during lockdown, and the Cabinet Office was trying to block the creation of a shielding plan.
The Cabinet Office was a bomb site, and many officials have come to me and said that this is causing chaos. There has to be some a formalised system to actually grip this, because the Cabinet Office was a dumpster fire.
The US State Department says it's intensely focused on getting the Rafah crossing open to allow foreigners to leave Gaza. It will reportedly be opened tomorrow. Earlier, explosions were seen and heard in Tel Aviv as it suffered its second major rocket barrage of the day. It comes as Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dismissed calls for a ceasefire in the war, saying it would mean surrendering to terrorism. In Gaza, 50 Palestinians have reportedly been killed and 150 injured in a suspected Israeli airstrike. The director of a nearby hospital in the territory says a densely populated area in a refugee camp was hit in the north of the Strip. Meanwhile, a pro-Palestine ceasefire rally is currently taking place inside Liverpool Street Station. It's not currently known if this is going to cause any rail disruption. We'll bring you more as we get it. More than 8,300 people have been killed by Israeli attacks in Gaza. And finally, King Charles has delivered a speech at the State House in Nairobi, where he quoted from the late Queen, his mother's diary. In that, Queen Elizabeth II said she didn't want to miss a moment of Kenya's extraordinary landscape. King Charles also thanked the people of Kenya for their support for the late Queen in 1952, when she became monarch. His Majesty also acknowledged the more difficult times of Britain and Kenya's shared history, finishing with a touching toast.
It is upon the enduring connection between our people that our partnership rests. It is on their enterprise, imagination, and fortitude that our common hopes depend. Together we are stronger, together our future is more secure, and together, as your national anthem says, may we dwell in unity, peace, and liberty.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by simply saying play GB News. Now it's back to Nigel.
In PMQs last week, we had Jill Mortimer, the MP for Hartlepool, saying that her workers in her constituency office were being harassed repeatedly by asylum seekers. This caused a considerable degree of uproar in the House of Commons and in much of the press ever since. And we sent Charlie Peters, our GB News Investigates reporter, up there to find out whether what she said was true. But it is also worth noting, and I think this has been chronically underreported, that an asylum seeker in Hartlepool has been charged with murder, and the case was investigated by the counter-terrorism police. We're not allowed to say any more about that legally, but it's important, I think, that you know. So let's go to Hartlepool and let's see, what did Charlie Peters find out? Was Jill Mortimer telling the truth?
Hartlepool MP Jill Mortimer caused a storm in Westminster earlier this month when she claimed that migrants had besieged her office.
My staff are intimidated by young men. The fact is, most of them are illegal migrants who should be expelled.
But critics said that these comments could fuel hate crimes and scaremongering and played into racist stereotypes about migrants. I sat down with the Tory MP to find out what was really going on.
Are you angry at the Home Office and indeed your own Home Office team for the fact that your staff are facing intimidation from people who have been refused the leave to remain but are still in your town? Is there not a dereliction of duty from your own government towards protecting your staff here?
Let me tell you now that whatever has been going on in the past, I have absolutely every faith in Robert Jenrick, the Immigration Minister, to get a grip on this now, and Suella, the Home Secretary. I know that they are as anxious as I am to deal with this problem, and I have every faith that they will.
Despite the MP saying that intimidation by migrants had been a problem since she came into office, she still said that she had faith in the government to get a grip on immigration. Her team showed us footage supporting claims that migrants regularly gather outside their offices, often in groups. The MP's office manager told us about her experience.
I will get a crowd of 2 or 3. I've had up to 20 young men at the door. They press on the bell. When they don't get an answer on the bell, they knock on the windows, then they kick the door, then they press the bell again, then they ring the phone. When I first started, I did used to open the door, and let people in and speak to them, because obviously we're here to help. But then it was, I'd go to the door and they'd push past and just walk straight in. And I've got to look after the staff in here. I can't have 5 or 6 young men storming into the office. I generally don't feel intimidated, but if you get a gentleman to the door and I'm going to get their documents and they push past me and push that door to get in, then yes, that's intimidating. It's not a nice feeling. I do have younger staff members in the other office. We've got no protection once they're in here.
But how does it feel to have your personal experience or being intimidated described as racist stereotyping? How does that make you feel? Do you feel like you're being...
It's annoying. It makes me angry and it's disappointing as well. I think they're prioritising political correctness over the safety of anybody. It's like, we don't matter. We're just here to serve. But what's going to happen if something happens to us? Are they going to come in and do it instead? Or are they going to say, oh, well, you know, that shouldn't have happened? How far does it have to go? Do we have to be hurt? Is that what they want? They want somebody to be hurt? So that we can then say, oh, well, actually, she probably wasn't racist. Or are they going to say, well, she deserved it because she was racist?
Jill Mortimer and her team reported intimidation by asylum seekers and illegal migrants in Hartlepool. But locals in her town said that the government was not doing enough to deal with this situation. Do you think the government is paying enough attention to the concerns of people in Teesside in general and Hartlepool in particular?
The government never pay any attention to the north. It's always been a north-south divide, and it's always going to be that way. Is it ever going to change? Probably not. Jill Mortimer's probably shouting her mouth off and nothing's going to get done about it. They're more interested in banning a bulldog breed than sorting issues like this out.
Charlie Peters, GB News, Hartlepool.
Well, that was Hartlepool. I'd be very keen to know whether this sort of thing has been happening in your town. Not for tonight, but for future programmes. Let me know, farage@gbnews.com. And Charlie Peters joins me now in the studio. Well, it does appear, does it not, that Jill Mortimer, the Member of Parliament for Hartlepool, was telling the truth?
And we can only show just a portion of the footage that we saw last week. There were dozens of clips, just like the ones we've just broadcast, of groups of men, sometimes families, in one case 5 or 6, gathering outside that door, knocking on the door, often phoning the office while they're there. And some of the testimony we heard from the staff that they had felt intimidated, as they claimed 2 weeks ago, but also that there had been incidents when they'd come to the door, pushed through, and they'd felt as though they'd been assaulted by these groups seeking to get an appointment, because they've been told that if you go and speak to the local MP, you can get your claim sorted out, the Home Office will rush it through. They don't have those powers, they can't do it, but this rumour spreads and these incidents occur. And, well, they were described as racist, scaremongering claims when Jill Mortimer raised this.
No, they were, and she was given quite a tough time in some of the newspapers for daring to... Well, she also said we should deport people who've come here illegally, and that obviously further inflamed those that seem to think the channel should be open to almost everybody. Now, Charlie, it seems to me, and, you know, I've just asked our audience the same question, that if this is happening in Hartlepool, and if, as you say, the narrative has spread, and you know, given social media and TikTok and all these things... We need to find out how widespread this problem is.
And it's worth noting that Hartlepool is generally considered by the state and by the government as quite a successful town for dealing with illegal migration and the huge asylum seeker backlog, in part because there are no usages of hotels in Hartlepool. They're very proud about that, the local party up there. They don't actually use hotels to store migrants.
No, but there are plenty of private houses that are being rented. I mean, that's how they're doing it, isn't it?
And walking around the town, we did see people just hanging around nearby areas that we presumed and were informed were used by asylum seekers, and people who'd had their claims rejected were still there. And this is the cause of the complaint by Jill Mortimer. Not only is her office dealing with people knocking on the door, intimidating her staff, besieging her office as she claims, but also many of the people doing that have been told, you need to go. Your asylum process has been rejected, and yet they're still there. And that's the cause of their rage. And you can imagine their frustration at that news and being that female staffer facing that intimidation and being told that you're playing up to racist stereotypes and you're scaremongering. We've contacted the people who made those claims. We've told them about the footage we've seen. Funny enough, we haven't had a response.
No, and that chap you interviewed anonymously at the end, you know, who said whatever Jill Mortimer says, he's got the feeling that nothing will change, nothing will be done. And frankly, if we move people out of hotels and put them in private houses, I mean, what is the difference anyway? It's just more diffuse within society. Well, Charlie, I think it's very interesting that you went and we've backed up what she had to say in the House of Commons. But we do need to find other MPs, and I'll bet you there'll be northern MPs, both Labour and Conservative, because, as you know, the vast majority of people that come in through Dover, we'll send them to the north of England, and that's where the burden is. So will you go and find me some more MPs?
Absolutely, and if anyone wants to have GB News come and investigate, no other broadcaster was willing to look at that footage. We can prove it. If the same problem's going on in your town, let us know and I'll be there.
Absolutely. Well, Charlie, they're backing up exactly what I said to you a couple of minutes ago. If you know of this problem in your town, if you're a member of Parliament and you're having the same problem that is being had up in Hartlepool by Jill Mortimer, let us know, because we want the truth to come out. Now, one of the long-running campaigns of this programme, and indeed something that I feel very strongly about, is the base at RAF Scampton. Guy Gibson, the home of course, the Dam Buster Squadron. Now, there's been a High Court judgment today, and we now go live to former, sadly, RAF Scampton to speak to GB News East Midlands reporter Will Hollis. Will, what have we learned from the court today?
Yes, well, it's the start of the judicial review, which is going to be a 2-day hearing. Today is the first day, tomorrow will be the second, and it can take RAF Scampton in one of two directions. The first is a £300 million regeneration, investment in aerospace technologies, and a guaranteed preservation of the heritage of the Dam Buster for generations to come. In the other direction, it could be the answer to solving part of a difficult chapter in the government's handling of the migrant crisis, easing the pressure on hotels, which right now are costing £8 million a day. The two things that we've heard that are interesting, let's say, Nigel, are the first part, which is something that we expected to hear, that the councils, West Lindsey District Council and Braintree, which represents RAF Wethersfield in Essex, they said that the use of air bases by the Home Office for asylum seekers is unlawful. We expected to hear that at the judicial review. Yeah. One of the things that we didn't expect to hear, though, was that there is an accusation that the time that they will be using these bases for is much longer than the original 1 year. It could, in fact, be as long as 3 years. We didn't hear a hell of a lot from the Home Office. We're going to be hearing a lot more from them tomorrow, but they, in statements, have said that they think that they are following the right planning requirements. Here, of course, at RAF Scampton, there are still many people that are sleeping outside of the front gates in tents with their signs saying that we don't want this to happen here, but they are optimistic about the judicial review. But they say if it doesn't go in their favour, if in a few weeks that we find out that RAF Scampton and Wethersfield will be used to house asylum seekers permanently for that 3-year period, they say that they aren't going anywhere, Nigel.
Interesting. I was going to ask you, Will, you've spent more time in Scampton recently than I have. I wondered whether perhaps within the community they were beginning to just accept that they've lost and it's going to happen. But you're saying that's clearly not the case.
It doesn't seem to be. I think there are two elements to the question you've just asked. People are saying that they aren't going to give up the fight, that they're going to be here outside of RAF Scampton, people that are from Scampton, but also people from as far south as Devon. But the other thing that I've been hearing today from the local residents of Scampton Camp, which is the former married living quarters of the RAF base, is that they're prepared if people do move in. And the way that they're preparing is ultimately security measures. One person showed me a personal alarm that they have, new cameras, bigger fences, and the way that they describe it is because they have a fear of the unknown about what is going to happen if asylum seekers do move in here, Nigel.
Yeah, I pity the village of Scampton. Will Hollis, thank you very much indeed. And clearly the fear there is very, very real. In a moment, I won't just go to Tel Aviv and talk to GB News' Mark White. I'll also show you the scenes that have taken place during the rush hour at Liverpool Street Station in the City of London tonight. Pro-Palestinian demonstrations making it very difficult for anyone to catch a train. All of that in a couple of minutes.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Take a look at this. This is Liverpool Street Station in the City of London this evening during the rush hour. And you can see that it is absolutely filled with an Occupy movement. But this time, it isn't just Stop Oil, it isn't Extinction Rebellion, and indeed, in terms of the numbers involved, it is significantly bigger. No, this is a pro-Palestinian Occupy from a group called Sisters Uncut, who are a feminist group taking direct action for domestic and sexual violence services since 2014. Do these people not actually understand that in Palestine, in nearly all of Palestine, women come directly under the guardianship of men? Women don't have the same rights as men. And I wonder whether they and some of their fellow protesters realise that when it comes to LGBT, a small group of people with a rainbow flag in Gaza last year were very severely beaten up. I find the whole thing astonishing, but here it is yet again. Yet again we see the politics of other countries on the streets of London and often elsewhere too. If this is what Tony Blair intended to give us through diversity, I have to tell you, Mr. Blair, I don't think it was very successful. And why have you been so quiet about all of this over the course of the last couple of weeks? You started it. Sadly, the Tories continued with it. Now, let's get to Tel Aviv and let's talk to GB News' security editor, Mark White. And Mark, for all the talk that we've been getting from people in the United Nations, demands for permanent ceasefires, overnight, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, he has been pretty clear that this is a time for war.
and they've taken him at his word. This has been the most violent day so far in the Gaza Strip, with Israeli ground troops on the ground pushing their way down into northern Gaza towards Gaza City itself. There was intense fighting around Jabalia, where there is a refugee camp in there as well, and reports coming out that there were Israeli airstrikes at this refugee camp, with claims from the Hamas-run Interior Ministry of hundreds of people that was killed. You've always got to take anything that the Hamas-run Health or indeed Interior Ministry say with, you know, the acknowledgement that this is coming from the Hamas-controlled government there. What we are being told from the IDF just in the last hour is that that intense fighting is continuing, that they have managed to destroy a very significant Hamas site where tunnel entrances were, where rocket launch sites were, command and control posts, and also weapons dumps. They claim that they have killed more than 50 Hamas terrorists, but the toll has also been on the Israeli side, with 2 Israeli soldiers killed, at least 2 more seriously injured, and there is talk in Israel of more deaths and injuries, but the IDF is not in a position to talk about that at this stage, Nigel.
No, and significant, I thought, that the Houthi movement in Yemen confirmed that they have now been firing rockets into Israel for the last 3 days.
Yes, and their spokesman speaking today said that they are now in this fight effectively, and they are going to continue to target Israel with ballistic missiles and also drones. A surface-to-surface missile was fired from a location in the Red Sea today. It was intercepted by a new Israeli missile system. That was also called into action to take down drones that headed for the Red Sea resort of Eilat. So some real concern, and it's not just, of course, southern Israel in this Red Sea resort. Northern Israel is seeing increased action again from Hezbollah and associated groups in southern Lebanon. And over in Syria and Iraq, reports of more attacks on US bases there. Another 4 attacks at least in the last 24 hours. So some real concern about the way in which, hour by hour, this scene here continues to deteriorate.
Absolutely. Grave news indeed. Mark White from Tel Aviv. Thank you. I did note that Hamas have told mediators that they will release a number of foreign captives in the coming days, and we will watch out for that. But for the 20,000 troops that Israel have put into Gaza, and for all the airstrikes and the claims that they're taking out Hamas bases, I'm struck by the fact there are something like 300 miles of tunnels underneath Gaza. And I'm pleased to be joined by warfare expert Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former British Army colonel, chemical weapons expert, and somebody that I believe has had a look and a serious think about the war underground. Hamish, welcome to the programme. As I say, we can flatten the top of it. We can kill everybody above the ground. But ultimately, isn't this a little bit like Vietnam? Haven't we got to win the war underground as well? Haven't Israel got to win the war underground?
Nigel, good evening. Yeah, absolutely. It is highly likely that the 240 hostages are being held captive underground. There are probably hundreds of miles of these tunnels that Hamas have developed over the last several years. And that is where they hide. They know it very well. And that is where they're launching all their strikes from. The strike on the refugee camp that your correspondent's just been talking about looks as though that hit a major tunnel complex because a massive hole has been created there. But the challenge of fighting in the dark in these places is massive. Now, the Israelis have special forces operators to do this, but even so, it is going to be a huge challenge. Now, for once in my life, I agree with actually Keir Starmer that we cannot have a ceasefire. That would create military paralysis particularly as the Israelis approach the tunnels. But what I would agree with others, that we need a massive humanitarian operation so that the innocent Palestinians who Hamas are using as shields can get out of the way, get fed, and allow the IDF to sort out these 30,000 terrorists. Most of them are going to be underground, and it's going to be a really hard fight. But even more difficult with those millions of innocent civilians that they're being used effectively as bullet traps.
Yeah, I mean, I understand about 40 trucks a day with aid is getting into Gaza, which is something, but it's by no means, I think, enough for the humanitarian problem that is there. When it comes to that war underground, presumably, the IDF has night sights, night vision goggles. Presumably, they have far better kit than Hamas to take on this challenge.
Well, they do. The Israeli special forces are very well trained on this. Actually, there is a great fear that Hamas might use chemical weapons under there, and we understand that Hamas do have chemical weapons. And when I was the Peshmerga's chemical weapons advisor fighting ISIS threw chemical weapons at us. But yeah, sure, the IDF will have breathing apparatus. They have a lot of high-tech stuff for dealing underground, but it's still a massive challenge. As you said, anybody who's read the stories of fighting underground in the Vietnam War cannot be less moved by the horrific scenes that come out of there. Exactly the same. Now, Hamas will know the ground. These are terrorists who are quite happy to die for their so-called cause, quite happy to have civilians in front of them. And that is what makes it hugely challenging. They'll booby trap. And in the dark, night vision doesn't work quite so well underground. But we do know that the Israelis have a lot of unmanned vehicles they'll push in front. Some so small you can't see. But for all the technology that the IDF have, this is still a huge, huge challenge. Which is why I think we need to get as much humanitarian aid in the south to feed the Palestinians, while the IDF deal with Hamas underground and hope save some or most of those hostages.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Hamish Breton-Gordon, thank you for giving us your level of expertise. And what a thought Hamish put there, not just a war underground, but one that could involve the use of chemical weapons too. Big day at the COVID inquiry. Lee Kane and Dominic Cummings, two of the people closest to Prime Minister Johnson during his time at 10 Downing Street during the COVID crisis. They really did let rip today. Was it really all Boris's fault?
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's on your teeth. It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Well, it was a pretty astonishing day at the COVID inquiry, including excerpts such as this from Dominic Cummings, who clearly hadn't dressed for the day.
You should trolley on it. Meaning?
Well, I'm sort of using the sort of generic term that we often used about the PM.
The term you used and his cabinet secretary used and his director of communications used and other officials, no doubt, about his propensity to...
Pretty much everyone called him the trolley, yeah. We had a fundamental problem, we had many fundamental problems. The two most obvious ones were the Cabinet Office was a bomb site, and we had a huge problem of quality control of documents going into meetings, and inconsistent data, inconsistent facts being read out. And many officials have come to me and said, this is causing chaos. There has to be some a formalised system to actually grip this, because the Cabinet Office was a dumpster fire.
Well, there you are, scruffy, vindictive and vitriolic, but then that's kind of Dominic Cummings. Well, Tom Harwood, our deputy political editor, was there. Now, we started off, Tom, I know, with Lee Kane, the former director of communications, and then Cummings. What was your overall impression of the day? Was this an attempt to sort of pin all the blame on Boris Johnson?
Do you know what? I think a lot of people expected it to be a lot of vitriol towards Boris Johnson, but perhaps the biggest surprise was how much the blame was spread around. It wasn't just Boris Johnson that Dominic Cummings went after, but also Sage, the Cabinet Office, the Health Department, Matt Hancock, and just about all the arms of government and how government works in this country. He had huge criticisms for senior members of the civil service, most notably the people in charge of the Cabinet Office, whom he described as utterly useless in their jobs. He was very nice about some people, but very, very mean about others, and particularly how these systems report in to number 10, meaning that the whole system of government was not communicating to itself particularly well. He had huge criticisms for how certain committees work, most notably COBRA, which wasn't even allowing in the most up-to-date data. In many ways, the government was dealing with data that was weeks and weeks old. But perhaps the most notable thing for me was how Dominic Cummings went after certain sage scientists, because there's this narrative that has been built up over the last year or so, that it was the scientists saying lockdown and the politicians who were saying no, whereas actually, in reality, the scientists were not saying lockdown very early. In many ways, the scientists were saying, don't close the borders. Dominic Cummings said that there was this view in government and around advisors that closing the borders to China might have been racist. And that was one of the reasons why the United Kingdom didn't have a stronger border policy, which is an extraordinary position to find ourselves in. But yes, huge blame spread across many different areas of government.
Tom Harwood, thank you very much indeed. I know you're going to be back there tomorrow, and thank you for joining us this evening. Well, we were told all the way through we'd be following the science, and therefore every decision that was made would be a wise one. I wonder what Dr. Bharat Pankania, senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter and former public health consultant in communicable disease control, makes of the inquiry so far. Were we following the science?
Well, clearly not, Nigel. And what is concerning is that elephant in the room has still not been addressed, because the questions to ask are, why were you concerned about the hospitals? Well, you were concerned about the hospitals because over the last 13 or so years, you have underinvested in resilience capacity in our hospitals, and now the pandemic has arrived and you're unable to cope. And we repeatedly see, Dominic Cummings, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, discussing what I feel is beyond their capabilities, because they're politicians, they're not pandemic experts, and yet they were discussing, should we do this, should we do this, should we do that? I know decisions are political, but they appear to be discussing the science for which they are not qualified.
Interesting, but no, that's a very, very powerful point. Now, look, this inquiry will rumble on. Maybe there'll be some accountability, probably not. But can we, and this is the really important thing that people want to know, can we learn some lessons from this so that if this type of problem comes again, we can handle it that much better?
Well, I hope so, but with respect to learning, unfortunately, we have a propensity to have history repeating itself. And an inquiry that takes so many years, and then the key people have left, moved on, etc., dilutes the effect of an inquiry. For an inquiry to be really good, really effective, lessons learned, it ought to be shorter in time period.
Wide words, Bharat Pankania. Thank you for giving us that assessment. He was very open, very honest, wasn't he? Well, of course, there's politics in this, and of course, I'm joined by Paul Connew, author of a Boris Johnson biography, not a fan of Boris, and a man who's written books on the COVID-19 pandemic. It does seem, Paul, that, before we get on to Boris Johnson, I know not your favourite person, that with the Cummings testimony, the whole world, basically the whole world are morons apart from him.
It was certainly... Today, actually, was fascinating. In one sense, it showed like government by WhatsApp, shows us what's up with government, in fact, in many ways. But it was almost an orgy of blame gaming, ego tripping, backstabbing. It was fascinating. But I don't think Amanda Iannucci could have imagined this for an episode of The Thick of It. It was beyond satire.
The description of the farce that was going on. And I mean, Lee Kane was plighter, but even he said that the Prime Minister used to oscillate. One minute he was pursuing the Jaws strategy, which is keep the beaches open, and the next minute it was keep the beaches.
That's the story of Boris's life, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you are Boris's fiercest critic. What I kind of get from all of this is that Boris is, and you can see, you can go to October, 15th of October 2020, he says, really, it shows we don't go for nationwide lockdown again. Every instinct in Boris is saying, let's do what the Swedes are doing. Let's not lock down. Let's after the initial errors, and there were huge initial errors, but that could happen to anybody in an unknown circumstance. By October, we ought to have known what we were doing, with testing, isolation, those sort of things. What this shows me all the way through is something different about Boris Johnson, that he wants to do what he believes is the right thing, and then gets talked out of it.
Well, yes. But what came through there, and although I find Dominic Cummings a man with an ego the size of Mount Olympus, that, in fact, some of what he said was undoubtedly, accurate. But, and particularly, and Lee Kane said the same thing, is that Boris would say one thing, and the next person he met would say something else, and he was like a rather thin tree blowing in the... Well, Boris is never thin, but a tree blowing in the wind and totally unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Lee Kane said that Boris himself had said he wasn't the right leader for this crisis.
Well, of course, Boris, soon will give his own evidence, in fact, later this year, and I'm sure he'll be giving his views when he joins this parish, in fact.
Oh, he will undoubtedly be giving his views.
But it'll be fascinating to see what he says, and of course, what the present Prime Minister says, because there can be awkward questions about the then Chancellor, Rishi Sunak's approach to it all as well. He's not going to have a smooth ride. It's certainly a very forensic and aggressive KC there for the inquiry.
Oh, no, he knows what he's doing. Paul, final thought, will we learn any lessons?
Hopefully, yes. I mean, this is about finding out who was to blame, what went wrong, but it's equally important because there's going to be another pandemic. Virtually every scientist will tell you that there's going to be another one, so we need to be prepared, and we certainly weren't prepared for this one, no matter what Matt Hancock might have been pretending.
No, Paul Connew, thank you, as ever, for joining us on the show. What the Farage moment is the ULEZ extension. We now have some numbers. 60,000 cars a day are having to pay the £12.50. That means TfL are better off to the tune of £730,000 a day. But here's the key number. About 50,000 fewer cars a day are operating on the outskirts of London. And what it means, Sadiq Khan, is you have trapped the poor. You have trapped the elderly in their houses for fear of paying £12.50. Whatever your views on net zero or climate change, this was never the right way to do it. In a moment, an upbeat story, a victory, at least I think it is, a massive government U-turn on ticket office closures. Apparently, they're going to stay open. I think that's a good news story to end the programme on.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, I was always right alongside the RMT's Mick Lynch on the idea that closing down all the ticket offices was a really rotten idea. People get there, they can be confused by the machines. It's also, for a sense of safety, nice to know that someone's there, particularly at somewhat deserted, smaller stations. It also means cash stays in circulation on the railways. I'm pleased. But let's get the full story. Christian Walmar is a railway journalist, historian and a former Labour politician. Christian, why did they think it was a genius idea to close all these offices down?
Well, actually, the idea came initially from the train operating companies who wanted to save some money, right? And they tried to do a deal with the Department for Transport. Said, if we save you some money, can we have half the money for us and half the money for you? And the Department for Transport said, no, but we like your idea. So we'll take on the idea, give us these plans to close basically 900 ticket offices, and we'll kind of sort them out and we'll take them through the process, which is to get them set by an organisation called Transport Focus, who would have to look at them, right? But then it all went horribly wrong. First of all, there were 750,000 people responded to the consultation process, and I bet that 749,000 of them kind of were against it. And then Transport Focus kind of had a look at it, and basically today they've announced that actually they've rejected all these plans. None of them actually passed muster. None of them kind of satisfied the needs for people to get into the stations and buy tickets over the counter and stuff. Yeah. And so therefore they're dead.
And ask for advice.
And all that sort of stuff, you know, complicated tickets.
Yeah, certainly some train lines with different companies operating on it. It is
absolutely.
Quite, going up to Milton Keynes from Euston, it's quite confusing for people.
No, this is something we're 100% agreed on, Nigel. And then they say, the government said, well, only 12% of tickets are sold. But when you think 12% of tickets, that's something like 500,000 tickets a day, you know. I mean, it's kind of quite a lot of tickets, right? You know, and so the whole idea was completely bad. But then the government has really done the dirty on the train operating companies, because they've said now, oh, we don't want anything to do with this. You know, don't even come to us with any proposals. And yet the train operating companies are desperate for money. They're actually being squeezed. So now they might well have to cut services because they can't save this money. And the government is not going to give them any extra money to keep these ticket offices open.
I was going to say, it's one piece of good news in what is not a very happy overall railway picture. Numbers still down since the pandemic?
Yes, they're about 80% back, or nearly 90%.
That's a huge change.
That's quite a big change, and the people who are not going, of course, are mainly commuters, and the people who are using it are leisure travellers. They pay less.
The commuters paying, of course, top-rate fares because they're going before 9:30 in the morning. Well, HS2 has gone, and we were assured... No, you laugh. We were assured by Rishi Sunak this would mean all sorts of wonderful railway projects across the north of England.
Well, that's another bit of government dishonesty. The trouble is, Nigel, I just don't believe anything they ever say. And now they've said, oh, well, they're going to re-spend this money that supposedly saved on HS2. But, of course, the money doesn't exist. It was money they were going to borrow to pay for these things. And so they'd have to borrow to pay for these other things, which actually they're probably not going to do. So what I dislike about all this is the dishonesty. I mean, they ought to be straightforward about what they want to do. If they have to cut the railways, then they should say, we have to cut the railways and this is what we're going to do. But they try and blame the train operating companies.
We are a year away, maybe less, from a general election. If you believe the opinion polls, we're going to have a Labour-led government. Have they thought through their transport strategy when it comes to the railways?
Well, put it like this. They're halfway there. I mean, they're right to say that the railways should be renationalised, and that's absolutely correct.
Okay, well, that's your view.
There's actually very few countries in the world that can run a profitable railway. And if you can't run a profit, it's not really a proper business. And if you're dependent on government subsidy, then you're always going to be beholden to government. Now, what we need is to recreate British Rail. It's an organisation like British Rail. British Rail, no.
I have terrible memories.
No, yes, we have terrible memories of some of the privatised companies. But if you look at the way British Rail was run, it was relatively efficient. It actually created amazing brands. Intercity, I mean, that's a worldwide kind of brand. It was actually quite good at spending taxpayers' money efficiently, and actually it produced actually quite good sandwiches, and that was one of the kind of nonsenses about it.
Christian Walmer, thank you. Well, good news about the ticket offices. What Christian's done here is to open up a bigger debate, and at some point we're going to have a big old debate. Should we renationalise the railways? I'm always deeply nervous of government running anything, but I'm prepared to listen, and I am prepared, in the case of the railways, if necessary, to change my mind. Now, remember the Colston statue being toppled into the dock in Bristol. Well, one of the organisers of all of this, Zara Salim, has today been jailed for 2.5 years. Yes, jailed for 2.5 years for diverting tens of thousands of pounds in donation from a fundraising page to fund her expensive lifestyle. Well, you know, I well remember what happened in Bristol and thinking the whole thing was a complete and utter outrage, and warning people what I'd seen of BLM in America, that it was an overt, dangerous Marxist organisation. And it isn't just, of course, Zara Salim that's been in trouble with money. You might have noticed that Patrice Cullors, who really set the whole thing up, now has a quite impressive property portfolio. Now, we learnt today in one of the newspapers that the Member of Parliament for Thanet South, Craig McKinley, who does appear quite regularly on GB News and indeed was on Jacob's show just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we learnt that he got sepsis, which can happen to anybody and happen very quickly, and actually had to be put into a coma as part of his recovery. Now, I've known Craig for 30 years. I worked actually with Craig professionally in the past. I've fought against Craig in elections, but I'm very, very alarmed to hear this. I wonder whether, Jacob, do you know any more about Craig McKinley's situation?
Well, he's recovering, and he's had obviously lots of messages from his friends within the party. And we want to see him back, and he's a very important figure because he was the first Tory to really go for the green blob, and he's doing very important work in Parliament with his climate change group.
Well, he's a former UKIPper, so of course he's always going to fight against authority.
Isn't he one of these rare people who even won an election against you, Nigel? It's very hard for Tories to do.
I was against him too, but it works both ways. Now, we heard the other day that the Royal British Legion was struggling for people in Brighton to go out and rattle the tins and raise money. And so GB News sent Patrick Christys down to Brighton, where he's been doing a magnificent job over the course of the last couple of days. And not just through money in the tins, that wouldn't, frankly, be true, but through just giving. He's managed to raise, thus far, £153,000 for the Poppy Appeal for the Royal British Legion. So we're delighted with that. It's massively over the target that we set ourselves. And yet, when we asked the Royal British Legion to come on GB News and discuss this, they wouldn't do it. Jacob, is this corporate culture now in the Royal British Legion?
Oh, almost certainly. And the acid of corporate culture is it doesn't represent the people that it ought to be representing, because when you're at events with the Royal British Legion, when they're doing things, they are people who have proper values, proper beliefs, and then they've got sniffy, woke leadership that thinks that GB News is beneath them. And it's just very sad after you've helped them raise £150,000.
Yeah, and I was out last year, I was out campaigning with Charlie Mullins in Sloane Square, and a phone call came through from the Legion. Get them out of there. I don't know, but look, we're not making an accusation, we're just speculating. Please, somebody from the British Legion, come on and say well done to Patrick Christys. That's enough from me. Let's have a look at the weather.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. This time tomorrow, Storm Kieran will be arriving. There are many warnings in place for damaging gusts of wind, particularly on Thursday across parts of the south, and heavy rain. There's warnings tonight from this area of low pressure bringing more rain, but here comes the storm, as I say, really arriving during Wednesday night and then lingering throughout Thursday with amber warnings across parts of the south. We have Met Office yellow warnings in place for tonight and tomorrow across parts of Northern Ireland and the southeast for the heavy rain that moves in. The rain also spreading its way into southern Scotland through the night. Lots of showery rain coming into Wales and southern England too, and quite a breezy night. A mild night here, but another chilly one in northern Scotland, where most of the night will be dry. But it's going to be a very wet, a very different day tomorrow for the rain spreads in across Scotland. As I said, we have got warnings in place for the night and first thing in the morning for Northern Ireland and across the southeast. There will be a lot of spray and surface water on the roads for the morning rush hour. Pretty blustery here too. A gusty, blustery day with a mixture of sunshine and showers for most
staying soggy across northern Scotland. Temperatures at best getting into the teens. But here comes Storm Ciarán, spreading up from the south and then spiralling in across the country during Wednesday night and lasting for most